It's the 1930s, and you are a Christian missionary in the South Pacific. You've spent years converting these savages to your religion. Things are going swimmingly. The natives have abandoned their heathen customs. They attend your church. They pay their tithe. They've embraced civilized Western clothing and values. Then one day, a mysterious figure appears. He calls himself John Frum. This John Frum has a message that turns everything upside down. Throw away the white man's money. Abandon the churches. Return to your traditional ways. Only then will salvation come. And here's the brilliant part. The islanders listen. Within weeks, thousands abandoned missionary churches. They discard Western clothing. They withdraw their savings and throw money into the sea. They begin all-night ceremonies celebrating ancestors you missionaries had taught them to renounce as demons. But John Frum isn't merely delivering them back to their old gods. Instead, he promises that if they return to their traditional custom ways, American ships and planes will soon arrive carrying unimaginable treasure. Refrigerators, radios, medicine, vehicles, all the cargo the white men have, but in unlimited quantities. So who was this mysterious prophet John Frum who convinced so many to reject Christianity? And why would anti-colonial rebels align themselves with America, of all places? Well, that's just one small twist in the tale of the world's strangest prophet. Things are about to get Coca-Cola-y. Before we get to John Frum's bamboo paradise, let's do our best to understand why Pacific Islanders were so receptive to prophets promising deliveries from heaven in the first place. You've really got to get your head into their space, alright? So, way before the missionaries brought wine and wafers, the islanders' worldview was structured around one truth. Wealth comes from proper relationships with the ancestors and correct ritual observance. This wasn't some quaint belief, it was reality, backed by generations of evidence. When you performed the right ceremony, grew the right crops, maintained proper social connections, you prospered. The big men, local leaders who gained status through accumulating and then distributing wealth, demonstrated this principle in action. The system made sense. Be generous, honor traditions, get rewarded. It's love thy neighbor on steroids. Now, previously, we dove into how Tanna Island went from paradise to colonial hellhole faster than you can say the words cultural genocide. But for those who want to skip that video, here are the cliff notes. The Tannese have been living their best island life for tens of thousands of years, worshipping ancestors, communing with their volcanic god Kaupapen, and drinking kava that hit the perfect sweet spot between relaxed and religious experience. Then the Presbyterian missionaries barged in during the 1830s with all the cultural sensitivity of a wrecking ball. Traditional dancing, banned. Kava, prohibited. Ancestral worship, demonic. And everyone had to wear Western clothes because apparently God gets really upset with exposed knees. The islanders were taxed into poverty, forced to work on plantations to pay for the privilege of being colonized, and watched their population collapse from 20,000 to under 7,500, thanks in large part to imported diseases and crushing despair. By the end of the 1920s, the Tannese were living in a shattered world. Everything that made sense for millennia had been labelled evil, while these strange white people seemed to command magical ships and incredible wealth through weird rituals that included talking into boxes that they called radios. It was weird, really weird. So there the Tannese were, forced to wear itchy Western clothes, attend boring church services, and pretend they weren't desperately missing their traditional rituals. When one night, in the 1930s, something strange happened. According to local law, a mysterious figure appeared to village elders during a kava ceremony. He introduced himself as John Frum, and came bearing a message that was basically the spiritual equivalent of "this party sucks and I am here to fix it." John told them to reject the white man's ways, throw away their money, abandon the churches, and return to traditional customs. If they did this, he promised that they would receive an abundance of cargo, magical goods, from across the sea. Alright, so who exactly was John Frum? Well, that's where things get fuzzy. Some say he was a spirit being. Others believe he was a local man in disguise. Some describe him as wearing a coat with shiny buttons, while others say that he was a little man with a high voice and bleached hair. The name itself is mysterious too. Frum is the Tannese pronunciation for broom. Is he a prophet, perhaps, who was here to sweep away colonialism? Or maybe it's simply John from America. Yeah, he probably said, "Hi, I am John from America," and now he's known by his devotees as John Frum. I love it. Whatever his origin, one thing was clear. John Frum was the ultimate anti-establishment guru. His message was essentially return to tradition, reject modernity, receive blessings. Colonial authorities were predictably unamused. It's just a superstitious native movement, they said, completely missing the irony that they had spent decades teaching islanders about an invisible man in the sky who turned water into wine and walked on water. But sure, it's the locals who were the superstitious ones. By 1941, John Frum's message had caught fire across Tanna. In what must have been the most satisfying mass resignation in history, followers began dramatically enacting his commands. They threw away their money, sometimes literally chucking their coins into the sea or going on spending sprees until they were flat broke. Take that, capitalism! They pulled their children from missionary schools, abandoned the churches, and quit their plantation jobs. All this without even providing the courtesy of a 2-week notice. Though neither would I. They resurrected banned customs, held massive feasts, and started drinking kava again. Lots and lots of kava. After years of prohibition, can you blame them? Imagine if someone banned coffee for a decade and then suddenly you could have it again. You'd probably go a little overboard too. The movement climaxed in a massive celebration where followers slaughtered precious pigs, island currency basically, and held enormous traditional dances. The colonial authorities watched in horror as their civilizing mission collapsed faster than a beach umbrella in a hurricane. Their response? Arrest the prophet. Officials detained a man claiming to be John Frum and exiled him to another island along with other movement leaders. The authorities smugly assumed the problem was solved. Chief Nikia, one of the early John Frum prophets, was imprisoned, with officials essentially saying, "Let's see your magic man save you now." This move had the strategic foresight of throwing gasoline on a fire. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Now here's where our story takes a turn that seems almost too perfect to be true. In 1942, just a few years after John Frum's followers had been told that miraculous goods would come if they returned to tradition, the skies over Vanuatu suddenly filled with aeroplanes. Lots and lots of aeroplanes. World War II had erupted in the Pacific, and the US military arrived in massive numbers to fight the Japanese. Over 180,000 American troops poured into the islands, setting up enormous bases complete with airfields, docks, warehouses, and hospitals. That's well over double the islanders' entire population. In fact, it probably would have been about a 4, maybe 5-to-1 correspondence. Many of these Americans matched John's description perfectly. Powerful, yet generous, bringing planes and ships loaded with precisely the items he had prophesied. Vehicles, refrigeration units, radios, Coca-Cola, preserved foods. The Americans paid real wages, small as they were, and, crucially, treated the islanders with a different kind of attitude than the colonial masters. Here were black men who, despite their second-class status in the American system, had clear authority, drove jeeps, operated radios, and controlled distribution of goods. All things the colonial authorities had insisted non-whites were incapable of doing. The American racial system was certainly no utopia, but it inadvertently offered the islanders a glimpse of a world where colonial racial order might not be the only possibility. For a brief, extraordinary moment, John Frum's prophecy appeared to be unfolding before believers' eyes. Colonial powers were indeed being displaced by Americans bearing cargo. US commanders became increasingly concerned about these native interpretations. By late 1942, reports of unusual religious activity centered around American personnel had reached military intelligence. The brass worried that these cult beliefs might interfere with wartime operations or potentially be exploited by Japanese propaganda. In February 1943, they dispatched Major Samuel Patton, a naval intelligence officer, to Tanna aboard the USS Echo specifically to investigate the John Frum situation. Patton's official orders were remarkably specific: determine whether John Frum posed any threat to Allied operations, assess whether Japanese agents might be manipulating the movement, and disassociate the United States military forces from any connection with native prophetic figures or religious movements. His actual visit was meticulously documented. Landing at Lenakel, Tanna's main port, Patton had a formal meeting with both British colonial officials and local chiefs. He wore his full dress uniform, complete with medals and insignia, inadvertently looking exactly like the divine messenger the islanders had been expecting. Through interpreters, Patton attempted to explain that the American presence was solely to defeat Japan, that John Frum was not an American, and that the US military had no religious mission. One village elder reportedly asked Patton, "If you are not sent by John, how did you know to come to Tanna?" Another questioned why, if not fulfilling prophecy, Americans brought so many goods but took nothing from the island in return. Basically, the concept of strategic military logistics was utterly foreign to people who had only experienced colonial extraction economies. Let's be real, the conversation would have been hilarious. "Hello, we are from America, and we want to clarify that we are not associated with John Frum." Yes, exactly, John Frum sent you to say that, just as he promised. No, you don't understand. There is no John Frum. Of course there is. He sent you with all of this cargo. Look, we're just here to fight the Japanese, okay? Yes, fight the Japanese. And also bring cargo, just as John said. I'm guessing Major Patton filed that under Mission Impossible and went back to actual war business. When the war ended in 1945, the Americans departed almost overnight, leaving the islanders staring in disbelief as their miracle workers vanished. Get this, the departing GIs even fed the mythology further by doing something that seemed certifiably insane to the locals. They pushed tons of perfectly good equipment, jeeps, refrigerators, Coca-Cola bottles, and even whole aeroplanes into the ocean rather than ship it home. This wasn't just military wastefulness, it was the result of a spectacular standoff between Americans and British-French colonial administration. Here's what actually happened. As the war wound down, US commanders realized that it would cost more to ship all their equipment back to America than simply replace it. So they offered to sell everything, vehicles, construction equipment, medical supplies, you name it, to the colonial government at a very, very lovely price. We're talking pennies on the dollar for nearly new goods. The colonial administrators, displaying the business acumen of a concussed penguin, decided to play hardball. They refused the American offer, believing that once the US forces left, they could simply claim all the abandoned equipment for themselves, free. Why would we buy what we can get for free, they reasoned, practically twirling their colonial mustaches. The Americans, not to be outmaneuvered, chose chaos. Rather than let the colonial administration get the equipment for free, they systematically bulldozed millions of dollars worth of supplies into the sea at Espiritu Santo Harbor. Locals watched in stunned disbelief as brand new jeeps, bulldozers, refrigerators, and crates of supplies were just pushed off the docks into the crystal clear waters. Meanwhile, the islanders were just thinking, wait, you're dumping all of that? Why don't you give it to us? Hello, we'll take it. For the Tannese and other islanders, this bizarre spectacle reinforced two things. First, Americans had such abundance of cargo that they could literally throw it away. And second, the colonial authorities were both powerless to stop them and too incompetent to secure these treasures for themselves. The locals named this underwater equipment graveyard $1 Million Point, and it became a powerful symbol, a temple of tantalizingly visible but unreachable cargo just below the waves. Local divers would sometimes retrieve smaller items, but most of the goods remained there to this day, a rusting monument to colonial hubris and American spite. With the Americans gone, leaving only memories, the movement was now fully convinced of its own legitimacy, and a lingering promise: John Frum would return, bearing cargo once more. They had witnessed partial fulfillment of the prophecy. Surely complete fulfillment would follow. They continued preparing through ritual and ceremony. Elaborate cult centers were established, particularly active on February 15th, John Frum Day, considered the most likely for his return. With the Americans gone, but the memory of the miraculous bounty still fresh, the John Frum followers faced a conundrum. How do you get the cargo to come back? Their solution was both ingenious and heartbreakingly earnest. If the Americans brought the cargo by building certain structures and performing certain actions, then recreating those structures and actions would surely bring back the cargo. It makes a weird kind of sense if you think about it. If you've never seen a factory or a shipping port, have no understanding of technology like radios, and suddenly people arrive from the sky with endless goods after doing specific rituals involving poles with flags and talking to boxes, wouldn't you assume that the rituals themselves were the key? So began one of history's most dedicated LARPing campaigns. John Frum followers in northern Tanna cleared entire jungle areas to build crude airstrips complete with bamboo control towers and wooden antennas. Men would sit in makeshift radio shacks wearing coconut headphones, speaking into bamboo microphones. They set up offices with desks fashioned from local materials, where clerks scribbled in handmade ledgers because they had observed how American quartermasters would write in books and then supplies would appear. It was essentially ritualistic bureaucracy, possibly the only time in human history that paperwork was performed enthusiastically. Women wove flags similar to those they'd seen on military bases, while men carved wooden rifles and drilled in formation. If marching in straight lines had preceded the arrival of chocolate and cigars before, surely it would work again. These rituals weren't performed just once or twice, they continued for years. Day after day, faithful followers would man the radio, scan the skies for planes, and practice their military drills. Perhaps the most formalized aspect was the creation of the Tanna Army in 1957. This wasn't a real military force, but a ceremonial society dedicated to performing military-style parades to honor John Frum and hasten his return. Men would paint their bodies with USA insignia, don white t-shirts embolizing the TA USA for Tanna Armor USA, and march in perfect step, carrying bamboo rifles with red-tipped bayonets. February 15th was designated John Frum Day, featuring grand parades, flag-raising ceremonies, and speeches promising imminent delivery. And so, every year, hundreds of people would gather, raise the American flag, march in formation, and then wait expectantly for planes to appear on the horizon. And every year, the skies remained empty. Now, I get it. It's easy to laugh at people building fake control towers and saluting flagpoles in the hope of summoning refrigerators from the sky. But there's something profoundly human about it too. The desperate hope that if you just find the right combination of actions, something magical will happen. It's not really that different from crossing your fingers, knocking on wood, or, kneeling with your hands clasped. As the cult evolved, its members became obsessed with certain symbols they associated with the incoming cargo. Chief among these was the Red Cross. During the war, islanders had noticed the Red Cross emblem on medical supplies and vehicles. To them, this wasn't just a humanitarian logo, it was a powerful sigil that seemed to accompany the most valuable goods. So they erected red crosses beside their roads and meeting places, not as symbols of Christianity or medicine, but as magical summons for supply deliveries. It was like seeing a FedEx logo and assuming that painting it on your house would cause packages to appear. They also adopted other symbols they had seen with plenty: Coca-Cola logos, military insignia, and even random English phrases copied from crates like "this end up" or "fragile," not understanding what these words meant, but believing that they had power. These sacred symbols formed just one part of Tanna's emerging cargo pantheon. Like a spiritual insurance policy, the islanders didn't put all their divine eggs in one basket. Because one mysterious deity wasn't quite enough for Tanna, another cult developed right alongside the John Frum movement, and this one might be even weirder. But that's a story for another time. Fast forward to today, and John Frum's devoted followers have dwindled to perhaps a few hundred, mostly elderly adherents. The movement's heartland, Sulphur Bay Village, near the rumbling Mount Yasso volcano, still hosts ceremonies and maintains the faith. But here's the beautiful, ironic twist. Many of John's promises have actually come true, just not in the way that anyone expected. Visit Tanna now and you'll see locals using smartphones, drinking Coca-Cola, wearing t-shirts with American logos, and watching DVDs on small televisions. The cargo did arrive, not through magical rituals, but through tourism, globalization, and economic development. Some John Frum villages now charge admission to tourists who want to witness their ceremonies or take photos of the bamboo rifle parades. The very rituals meant to summon the cargo have themselves become a source of cargo as tourist dollars flow in. Amazingly, when interviewed, elderly believers still insist that John will return, they're just not sure when. John has been delayed, they explain with serene certainty. It's basically the religious version of "your package has been rerouted." Chief Isaac I, before his death, would tell journalists, "John promised that he would bring good things to us from America." And when asked why, after 80 years, John hadn't delivered, Isaac simply shrugged. "John say that he will come, we wait." Mind you, I find it amusing that many of the people asking this have been waiting themselves for 2,000 years for Jesus to return. It's as if they can't recognize the same religious pattern in others. Again, it ain't as weird as it looks, is it? No doubt, the story of John Frum and the cargo cults offer profound insights beneath the superficial strangeness. First, it reminds us how different people can interpret the same reality. To Western eyes, military supply chains were mundane logistics. To the Tannese, they were supernatural manifestations. As one elder put it, "You have your God who does miracles, so do we." Second, it shows the incredible power of hope. Generations after generations maintain faith in John's promise, despite zero evidence of its fulfillment. Of course, that's what all religions ask of their adherents, to believe without proof, to have faith that reward will come in this life, if not the next. Third, it highlighted how capitalism and colonialism created such obscene inequality that divine intervention seemed to be the only plausible explanation for Western wealth. When people saw whites with seemingly endless supplies while they were struggling for basics, supernatural gifts made more sense than complex economic systems they'd never seen. Some anthropologists argue that cargo cults weren't just confused reactions, but actually subtle forms of resistance. By reimagining foreign powers as something that could be acquired through ritual, islanders were psychologically reclaiming agency in a world where they had been rendered powerless. The genius physicist Richard Feynman even coined the term cargo cult science to describe research that follows the outward forms of science without actual substance, just as islanders built bamboo control towers without understanding aeroplanes. The metaphor has since extended to software development, cargo cult programming, and business, cargo cult management. So the next time you mindlessly follow a procedure without understanding why, congratulations, you're participating in your own little cargo cult. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check the status of my much needed Patreon support order. I have a feeling that today might be the day it finally arrives.